بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So this was the last thing that we had spoken about last time, and how the shaitan has the ability to even influence the anbiya. So the argument that he was preparing, or the argument that he set up here, is like, okay, well, if the shaitan has the ability to influence the anbiya, so what about us? Right? And we should always and constantly be vigilant so that we don't fall into this trap of allowing the shaitan to distort or distract our thoughts. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. So the question then he brings forward is like, okay, should I focus on being wary of the shaitan or loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Like, so if I'm constantly vigilant, how can I focus on my love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Which is a valid question. And he himself, he answers it. He says, well, these things can actually be done in parallel, right? It's possible to be wary of the shaitan and increase in my love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the same time. And he uses the ayah, وَلْيَأْخُذُوا حِذْرَهُمْ وَأَصْلِحَتُهُم. Also on their guard and armed with their weapons, وَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ أَسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِّبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ, that prepare against them whatever forces you can muster, including war horses. So saying here, and why is he using these ayat, or why is he using these verses as a proof for this idea of loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being wary of the shaitan? Yes. All right, it's these things should go hand in hand. And not just that, if I'm prepared, right, the moment I've prepared, right? So over here, if we look at these verses, right, I've taken my weapons. And in this case, when it comes to dealing with the shaitan, what are my weapons? I'm sorry? Okay, taqwa. Sure. What else? Right, learning to ignore the shaitan. And not just that, there are practical weapons that Allah has given us. Dua, adhkar, reading the Quran, good deeds, right? These are very natural things that prepare this fortress that we have against the shaitan. Yes? Dhikr. Right? All of these things are natural tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to protect ourselves from the shaitan. And if I'm doing those things, well, who am I doing them for? I'm doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So by me doing these things and by me doing these good deeds, what is happening to my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? Ideally, it's improving. Right? Ideally, if I'm doing them with the right intention, it's bringing me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the same time, what's going on? I'm getting further away from the shaitan, right? Like, because I'm building up my spiritual defenses. And this idea of having a spiritual stamina is something that's really important. So when we talk about physical stamina, right, we go to the gym, we try to work out, or we run, or we do like other activities so that we can build up our stamina so it becomes easier to run. In Islam, getting to Jannah is a marathon. Right? Getting to Jannah is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And if it is a marathon, how do I build up my spiritual stamina? By engaging in more and more good deeds in different ways and in different shapes and different forms. And by me doing that, I can become a more efficient runner, right? So we're talking about spiritually. How do I become a more efficient runner? By doing those things that I love and those things that I enjoy. Because what's going to happen as I'm moving through my spiritual journey? Things will get easier, right? Things will get easier. They'll be more fulfilling. And not just that, how am I going to start moving? Right? I'm going to start moving even quicker, right? Because I feel that push. And we had talked about this before is like when it reaches a point of qana'ah, right? When they reach a point of being content with something, what does it do to them? I'm sorry? If I'm content. Huh? I want you to think about that. If I've reached a point where I'm pleased with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me, right? So I've reached a point now. Huh? For sure, right? So like a lot of the dunyawi temptations, they start falling away. There's no doubt about that. But if I find that, okay, I'm finishing maybe a third of the Quran every week. I'm sitting down making my adhkar. I have a time that I'm making my dua. I'm making my prayers on time. I'm giving my sadaqah. My relationships are great. What do I want now? I want more. Right? That's what qana'ah does. Right? That's what being content does. That's like, man, this is so great. What do I want? I want more of it. And this develops this positive feedback loop, right? Because I'm doing so many of these good things, I want to do more because it just feels amazing. You guys know, like, well, I don't know how many of you run, but like you get that runner's high, right? There's a certain point where you reach and you're running, you might be exhausted, and all of a sudden you feel like you have the second wind. And this is how it works with good deeds. Once I develop a stride in those good deeds, there comes a point where it's like it's a little bit tiring, but it's also invigorating, right? Like when we do these deeds, it's like we feel so empowered. We might feel spiritually exhausted sometimes, but then, and I'm sure all of us that have experienced this, we come to the masjid and we come to pray tarawih, and what happens? So, like I'm exhausted when I come, right? I might have just broken my fast, or whatever, and I do my first takbirah for tarawih, and I'm hearing the Quran. What happens? Like it's like I get a second wind, right? It's like my whole attitude changes, and sometimes we don't realize it, but I want all of us to think back and be like, man, yeah, that's actually right. That really happens. Like I completely feel the spiritual recharge the moment I engage in that, and this is something that we need to learn as well. And there's a very famous hadith of Fatima radiallahu anha where she was complaining about physical weakness. Like subhanallah, it's actually amazing. She comes to her father sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she says to him, you know, Baba, look at my hands. Like they're all blistered. Like my hands are all blistered. Please give me a servant. Please. Like going and fetching water and this and that. And not only is she the daughter of the Prophet, how does the Prophet view her from amongst his daughters? His favorite, hands down favorite daughter. Alayhi salam. And she goes to him. She's like, you know, my hands are blistered, but he said, I have something better for you. And she, what do you think? How do you think she felt the moment he said that? She was like excited. She's like, yes, you know, alhamdulillah. Finally, I hate going to that well. I hate drawing up that water. He's like, before you go to sleep, say subhanallah 33 times, alhamdulillah 33 times, and Allahu Akbar 34 times. And he said, this tiredness that you feel, it will go away. Why? What happened? Right. So I think this is actually a very good point. That spiritual stamina, it actually has an effect on our physical health. This is a very important point. So this idea, like, you know, we have different types of health, and you know, I know there's like this big thing and focus on like mental health. If I want to have the biggest effect on my mental health, then I should invest in myself spiritually. Right? That's the biggest effect I can have. Not to say that there aren't methods and techniques that bolster and make it more concrete, but this is a huge way for me to better my mental health. And based on this hadith, it very clearly has an effect on my physical health. Okay, so this physical tiredness that she's feeling, he said, do this, and it will help with that physical tiredness. Like, what else can I benefit from this hadith? Why do these things? I want you to think about it. Think about her complaint and think about the adhkar. All right, the how. So how would she take that away from this lesson that her father sallallahu alaihi wasallam was giving her? Okay, so I want to kind of explore that a little bit, because what's the alternative? He says he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's clearly teaching her a lesson. Yes, he's saying, okay, I'm going to give you these spiritual tools instead of giving you this physical servant. Because if he had given her the physical servant, why? What would that take away? Or why would that be, or why would that take away from the lesson? Right? Gratitude. And I believe that was the lesson that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was actually instilling in his daughter. You know what's amazing about Fatima radiallahu anha? It was said about her that the one who imitated the Prophet the most in the walk, in the presentation, in the way of speaking, in the mannerisms was who? It was Fatima radiallahu anha. And why? Because of these lessons that her father instilled in her, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And teaching this gratitude to her, that okay, yes, I could do that for you, but even the fact, yes, you have blisters on your hands, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you hands. He's given you strength. He's actually given you the ability to carry. And who's the one that gave that to you? Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. Right? It's really amazing. Like the subtleties in some of the lessons. And the fact that we repeat that, and this is a lesson that even we have taken from her, alayhi salam, that this is a legacy that was passed down to us so that we could learn until today. To understand what it means to be grateful. To understand what it means to have the ability to even walk, right? Like even walking to that well. Or the ability to hold on to it, or the strength to carry it. The blessing that's in water itself, right? That we actually have to go and we have to seek it. If not a lesson for us today, when was the last time any of you went to a well? How many of you know what a well, how it works? You push the button along, you turn the, you turn it, like the magical water comes out of the faucet, right? Like subhanAllah, so even, so wells work with pressure, right? So you actually have to pump the water, and that's modern, right? Those are modern wells, let alone dropping down a bucket. How much water can a bucket hold so that it's reasonable enough weight for the strength of a person to carry? Huh? No, she was married by that time, so she was a grown woman. So she's taking it, but I'm saying, like, how much water can you physically carry in a bucket? Like how many, you know what I mean? How many buckets in going back and forth would you need, either to cook or to clean or, for personal use? What if you have to take ghusl? Like what if you have to take a shower? How, you know what I mean? Like you need to work for it. Right? Yeah. Yeah, you'll need the ghusl, right? after carrying all that water. But subhanAllah, it's like just small lessons, right? These small lessons to help build up that spiritual stamina, right? This is something that's really important and fundamental to our religion. So he, Azza wa Jal, he says that, so Imam Ghazali, he mentions these hadith, and all of this preparation is for what? So he's saying, get your arms, right? Get guards, get your swords, prepare your horses. These are all against what type of enemy? Horses and swords, right? Can I fight the shaitan with a gun? Right? He, Azza wa Jal, is talking about the physical enemy. Like, these are the things that you need to do. So he's like, okay, if this is the enemy you can see, what about the one that you can't? And these are all of the tools that we talked about. Those are the weapons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. I don't have the physical ability to fight the shaitan, right? It doesn't matter how much training I do. It doesn't matter how fast my hands are or how powerful my kicks are. It does nothing against the shaitan, right? Because he's an unseen enemy. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forces us at this point. And like I said, doesn't matter how much I work out, doesn't matter how well trained I am with a gun or with a weapon, all of that is useless. All of it. I'm forced. Like subhanAllah, it's amazing. This could be somebody who is completely handicapped, completely unable. Him and myself all have to use the same tools. All of us. We're forced. Somebody who's physically incapable, and even somebody who's physically capable, all of us are forced to use the same tools when it comes to the unseen. And that is returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Muhayriz, he said, a prey you see but doesn't see you is likely to be caught. Right? So if you have zebra that are out in the pasture and you have the leopard that's in the tall grass, what's going to happen to the zebra? Right? It's going to get caught because it doesn't see it. And a predator that sees you but you don't see it is likely to catch you. So the moment that the prey sees the predator, what happens? It becomes easier to run away. So how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the predator apparent to us? Right? So by making his plans clearly visible to us. Right? There are a lot of things sometimes we can see within ourselves. We start doing something and all of a sudden we hear a whisper and we know where that whisper is coming from. Right? It becomes so apparent to us. And it becomes so much easier to combat it. Remember, when we had talked about riya, when is the easiest and best time to handle that riya? The moment I realize it. Why? Because that is when the thought is the weakest. But the moment it takes hold, it becomes that much more difficult to remove. And we had said that Imam Ghazali, he likened the riya to weeds. And the weeds, the longer they're embedded, the deeper, right? The deeper their roots are, and the more difficult it is to remove. Because even if you cut off the top, what happens? It'll just grow right back because the roots are already set in place. Sure. Hmm. Sure. So my question would be, does it matter? Right? So if I'm receiving whispers, right, whether the whispers be from my heart, right, my heart might lean toward those things, or it be from outside from the shaitan, does it make a difference? No. Right? Like the shaitan might be trying to exploit my weakness, or right, this might be my own weakness. See, I gave the khutbah I gave last week was on homosexuality. Somebody came to my office afterward, and they were like, well, there's some scientific studies to show that there are 2% of animals that actually have homosexual tendencies, blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, did I even talk about nature versus nurture in the khutbah? And he was like, no. I was like, you know why? He's like, why? I was like, because it's irrelevant. I said there might be people who have a genetic predisposition to lying. There might be people who have a genetic predisposition to alcoholism. There might be people who have a genetic predisposition, and this is something that has also been scientifically shown, to pedophilia. But it doesn't matter because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He promises and He tells us, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. It's not possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would ordain a command or prohibit something except that a person has the what? The ability to overcome it. So even if I have that leaning, right, even if I have that predisposition, I have the ability and the tools to actually overcome that. And this happens with a lot of people, right? So even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that Allah curses the one who sits at the table where the alcohol is being passed around. Right? You guys are familiar with this hadith. It's in Imam Tirmidhi narrates it. Huh? Chapter was prohibition of music. So I'm so in this hadith, I always found it interesting that the Prophet ﷺ, he said at the table where alcohol is passed around. Why didn't he say at the table where alcohol is served? Hmm. Okay. If, what's the setting? Why is the setting different? Okay, when it's being passed, all right. And who was the Prophet ﷺ talking to? What group of people? He was talking to the companions. And the prohibition for alcohol, the complete prohibition, did it come relatively early or relatively late? It came relatively late. Why? Because they used to drink a lot. Like it was a cultural staple to drink alcohol. And when we have this staged prohibition, right? So initially it was, okay, alcohol it's not that good, right? Then you had, well, when you're praying, don't be drunk when you're praying. And then finally a complete prohibition. And part of the reason for a scaled prohibition was because their hearts were so attached to drinking alcohol. And in certain societies, and for those of you that might be more involved with society here, how culturally pervasive is drinking? It's everything, right? Right. Yeah, yeah. So any social gathering, any social gathering you go to, what is the one thing that is guaranteed, even if you don't eat anything? Alcohol. This is, this is not dissimilar to the time of the mushrikeen. So the time of the pagan Arabs, this is not a dissimilar thing. That they would culturally constantly drinking, like loved alcohol. So how easy is it to remove that from people's hearts? It's tough, right? It's difficult. So if I'm in that environment and alcohol is prohibited, but I just stopped drinking, like maybe like 6 months ago, and all of a sudden a cup is coming toward me, what are the chances of me taking a sip? Right? It's really high. Right? It's really high. Even the use of vessels. So, is it permissible for me to drink water out of a Jack Daniel's bottle? It's clean, right? Bottle's clean. Somebody puts water in it and I drink it. Is that permissible? Eh, it's been cleaned. That's why I said it's been cleaned. Even if it's permissible. But there was a time where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he prohibited drinking anything out of vessels that were used for alcohol. Why? It's not to tempt people, right? This idea of temptation, this idea of social pressure, this is something that's really important. But saying that, eventually, how did the companions deal with alcohol? How did the prohibition, when the prohibition came, what did they do? Oh, they threw it into the streets, right? They poured it out completely. They weren't like, yeah, Rasulullah, come on, you know, can we work something out? So their companions. Listen, there are people who always sinned, even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. People made zina. It happened from the companions. There we have 3 verified stories, and the reason we know is because they came forward and they admitted it. You have a story of a young man and young women. They used to come late for the salah. You guys know why they came late? No. Because so imagine this is Masjid Nabawi, right? This is the entire masjid here. This is the entrance. People come in. The rows, how are the rows organized? So the men pray here, right? So this is the mihrab. This is where the imam is praying. And where do the men line up? They line up right behind him, right? They go this. And as the rows are added, which way do the rows go? They start moving back. And for women, where do the rows start? They start all the way in the back, right? And then the rows start adding. And where do the rows move then? They move forward. So if we're late, where am I praying? Close to the women, right? And the women are playing close to the men. And they used to look at each other. And the reason I mention this is people act like, oh, it was like this amazing, you know what I mean? Pure, you know what I mean? Like they didn't have these problems or these issues. And some of them used to drink too. And they would be publicly drunk. There was a governor who actually led prayer and he was drunk. And he kept adding rakat. And somebody called him out and they're like, yo, what are you doing? He was like, Azidukum? He's like, you want me to pray more? and I don't mean to ever dishonor or discredit the maqam and the position of the companions. Radiallahu anhum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was pleased with them, but they are still humans. And they had shortcomings. And they had human problems. And they had human issues. And if we understand that, it helps us understand how to navigate today. Yeah. Absolutely. So how did they deal with that? Yeah, so they didn't have any of those things, but at the end of the day, what was the rehab for them? Remember we talked about remember I was talking about this the mental health boogeyman? What is one of the biggest mechanisms for me to overcome a lot of my problems and issues? Huh? Being solution focused. That's number 1. Number 2, my spiritual stamina. Remember? The moment, why did it take a time? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was actually building their spiritual stamina up to a point where it didn't matter what He Azza wa Jal prohibited or what He commanded. They were going to what? They're going to obey and they were going to accept it. And even the people, even the ones who were doing zina, or even the ones who were coming late, right, to look at each other, even the ones who were drinking alcohol, in their hearts, they knew what? They knew it was wrong. Right? They had accepted it. But they understood and it was their shortcoming. And this is what they had fallen into. So, having that spiritual stamina is something that is so important and something that can really push us, right? There's a huge drive that's behind it, and it's not something that we should ever overlook. It's not something that we should ever belittle. I think it's a huge part of, like, when we talk about mental health, it's a huge part. A big part of our mental health is our spiritual health. Like, if I'm spiritually healthy, it will help me with those things. It'll help me overcome a lot of those problems, a lot of those issues. And if I am facing those issues, whether it be anxiety, whether it be depression, substance abuse, whatever the case might be, I can use that to help me overcome those. And the rest of it is just technique, just being very honest. It's just very simple technique. All right, how do I overcome this? What are some of the solutions? What are some of the things I need? And then getting those steps in order to get to that place where I want to be. But I need to decide where I want to be. One of the other amazing things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us is agency. Right? This is something that we shouldn't overlook either. Agency means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us power. It means that He's given us ability. He's given us strength. He's given us tools and choices. I remember one of the brothers was complaining to me. He was like, aren't you worried about, like, the Muslims and their situation and blah, blah. I was like, I'd only be worried under one condition. He's like, what's that? I was like, if I turned to the community at large, right, the Muslim community at large, and we didn't have an answer. Like, we didn't have a strategy and we didn't have a solution. We're not always good at implementing, right? That's a different conversation. But alhamdulillah, I have yet to face an issue or to face a problem where we do not have some type of solution, we don't have some type of strategy in place. Walillah alhamd. Right? And that's something that we should really be proud of. And like I said, sometimes we fail at implementing. Sometimes we're not always good at it, but we do have the ability to. Yeah. Yes. No, there's a lot of harms. There are a lot of harms. I mean, different substances cause different types of harms, and subhanAllah, the number of people that are killed because of drunk driving, and like, if you just look at the societal harms from some of these things, like, that should be enough to be like, okay, hey, listen, we need to stop this. But look at the attachment. Isn't it crazy? Like, people know that the number of people that are, and not just that. Do any of you know, like, some of the DUI laws, like driving under the influence, like what kind of fines there are, what kind of trainings you have to do, how much money do you have to spend in legal fees to just, like, get it either removed from your record or, like, dismissed or something. It's anywhere between like $15,000 to $30,000 just to deal with the court stuff. People are still willing to take that risk. How beloved does something need to be that you're still willing to take those, that extent of risks? May Allah protect us and our families. So busying ourselves with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants does not contradict staying away from what He warns from. Because if I'm doing those things that He Azza wa Jal wants me to do, if I'm praying, I'm fasting, right? If I'm giving zakat, if I'm doing all of the things that I'm supposed to do, what is the consequence of that? I stay away from the bad things, right? These things, they go hand in hand, and this is something that's so important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, that the prayer prohibits an individual from falling into evil and obscenity. So if I'm still doing things regularly, right, it doesn't mean that we don't slip sometimes, but if I'm doing things regularly, what is the one thing that I should probably spend time and examine? My prayer. Simply. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. Right? Is it not with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that brings peace and tranquility to the heart? So if I'm constantly feeling agitated and upset and angry, right, and jealous, like if I have a lot of these negative feelings, like what kind of dhikr am I doing? How am I remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How am I engaging with Him? And if I'm not engaging with Him in a meaningful way, then how come my heart is not coming to ease? Right? These are things that we need to ask ourselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. That do they not ponder over the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it that there are locks over their hearts? And what do these locks look like? These locks can look like jealousy, they can look like anger, they can look like hatred. All of these negative characteristics, they just block our heart, right? And they hold our hearts down, they weigh them down. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is essentially telling us and commanding us, if you want to engage with me, if you want to engage with my book, if you want to engage with my words, all you have to do is remove those locks. So I think the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very easy. Um, we make it difficult, right? We make it hard. We create our own challenges. Sometimes we create our own obstacles, and we create those mental blocks. And this is where it's important to reach out and have a mentor, right? This is where it's important to have somebody to discuss, to be like, hey, listen, I'm really down. SubhanAllah, I was speaking to a brother recently, and he was like, man, I've been having this recurring dream for years about arguing with my father. And I was like, okay. I was like, how's your relationship with your father? He was like, it's fine. I was like, have you told him about this dream? He's like, no, I'm afraid that I'm going to get into an argument with him, just like I saw in the dream. I was like, do you think your situation that you're in right now, in avoiding talking to him, like in avoiding engaging with him, is better? He's like, no. He's like, it's so heavy on my heart. I said, what if he told you, my son, it's just a dream, don't worry about it? How would you feel then? He's like, man, I would feel so much better. I was like, do you hear yourself right now? He's like, yeah, I just never spoke to anyone about this. I was like, look how the shaitan is trying to ruin the relationship between you and your father. And I was like, how much life does your father have left? What if la samahullah, he passes away and you never expressed this to him? You never developed a deeper relationship with him. You never spent time with him. You never spoke to him. How would you feel then? He was like, man, I would feel terrible. I said, so do you think that this is something that's natural, or do you think this is something from the shaitan? He's like, no, it's definitely from the shaitan. I was like, man, go talk to your father. It's okay. I said, even if you argue with him, it's okay. You come to a resolution. I said, bring him in, we'll talk. It's not a big deal. But we have to learn how to engage with ourselves. We have to learn how to engage with others. And sometimes we do get lost, right? Sometimes we reach a place and we're like, I don't know where to go. And one of the most common discussion points that I have with people who come and see me and sit down with me, I've tried everything. Very common statement. I've tried everything. Sure. You tried everything that you know. There's a reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, and seek counsel from them. Sit down, talk to others. But what is the thing that's preventing me from talking and seeking counsel from others? It's not ourselves. It's our own egos. If you actually think about it, it's our own egos. Why? Because I don't want to be humble and I don't want to be vulnerable. Right? I don't want to put myself in a situation where other people might think less of me. But does it matter what people think of me if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with me? Right? Does it matter? At the end of the day, what do we want? We just want to rid Allah. We just want Him to be, like, we want Allah to be pleased with us. We want Allah to be happy with us. We want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to smile upon us. We want His mercy to descend upon us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all those things. So we have to make that effort. Like, we really have to push forward. And we have to overcome ourselves, right? Like, you know, when we were talking about the nafs, that is 100% nafs. Like, the moment I'm like, well, what are people going to say? And that's my ego. That's 100% my ego. But I still have to overcome it. It's like, why? And why do I need to overcome it? Because I want Allah's mercy to descend upon me. And I don't want this to be the barrier between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, we create our own ceilings, right? You know the glass ceilings? Like, we create our own glass ceilings. And if I want them to be overcome, I just need to overcome that ego. So he mentions 3 groups previously, right? So he said that group that says, like, oh, you don't need to worry about the shaitan. He said this is like, it's untenable, right? This is not something that is that's even a reasonable option to follow. And he says that I've already explained this on the Book of Reliance and the Book of Tawakkul. But in summary, he says preparation does not nullify reliance. What does he mean by that? Ahsan. That's exactly what it is. Right, you're tying your camel. So here, and I think we had mentioned this example previously. What does this look like? So if I get in my car, I know my tires have air. I know I have a full tank of gas. I put my seatbelt on, make sure that the oil gauge is good, the car's not running hot. What are the preparation points, and where's the tawakkul? Simple as that. All of these things are preparation. All of it, right? Looking at my gauges, looking at my car, making sure, like, you know what I mean? Like making sure everything's working. This is preparation. Whether I arrive to my destination or not, that is where I have to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's saying here, doing all of these things does not negate tawakkul. So what if I say like, oh, I just need to get in my car, and if it turns on, I just go. How come that's not considered tawakkul? Why is that a problem? Huh. Okay, but someone might be like, well, if I'm relying on Allah, I don't need to prepare. Maybe. No, no, sure, I get that. Why? Why do I still need to prep? Yes. Uh-huh. I agree with you guys. But my question is why do I have to do my best? Why can't I just go straight to tawakkul? Okay. So there's an element of personal responsibility. I definitely agree with that. What else? Sure. No, I mean, like, listen, as conceptually, you guys are right. Like, I don't disagree with any of these things. Uh, right. If I don't actually prepare, if I don't wear my seatbelt, then I get ejected from my car. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and our families. What is the thought that can creep into my mind and my heart? It can actually lead to having su'ul dhan billah. It can actually lead to having ill thoughts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, I relied on him. How come I still disfigured my face? I relied on him. How come my air deflated in my tires? Like, there are a lot of things. Versus somebody who had fully prepared and they did the best they could, and they don't reach their destination. Something happens along the way. What can I tell myself? Right? I did everything he told me to do. This outcome is the what? This is the intended outcome. And even though we might not see it, this outcome is probably the best one. Like, I wanted to do something, right? I wanted to get somewhere. I wanted to accomplish something, and all of a sudden, I'm stopped. And in the moment, guess what? It sucks, right? Like, in the moment, it's terrible. It's like, oh my God, this is so bad. This is so terrible. But sometimes looking back, and I'm sure many of us have experienced this, sometimes looking back, it's like, man, that was a huge learning experience for me. Like, subhanAllah. Or sometimes we look back like, man, I really dodged the bullet with that one, right? Like, you really wanted that job, and then it's like, man, it didn't work out. And then 6 months later, company's filing for bankruptcy, right? And you're like, whoa, man, yeah, it hurt in the moment, but at that point, it's like, it's such a huge relief. Why? Because we don't understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's infinite wisdom. Like, we don't understand the plan. And part of the reason we don't understand, because we can't see it, right? We don't know the end game. We don't know what's going to. Our job is to do the best that we can. Our job is to prepare as best as we can. Because that way it removes any room for doubt. And I want to make sure that my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is consistently sustained. And the best way for me to do that is to be the best prepared. Simple as that. So these are some of the elements, inshallah, that we should definitely work on. Because ultimately we all know, right? We all know, every single one of us. Life, death, health, whether I have money or I don't have money, all of these are in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands. I literally have no control over it. Literally. I don't have any control over any of these things. I can prepare. I can do the best that I can. And what are some of the things that I can do? Is like, as long as I'm living, then I should do my best to prepare for my death. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me health, then I should prepare for those times where I'm going to fall ill. If I have money today, what should I probably be doing? Saving it. Because there's going to be a time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might take it away. And how the companions used to view a lot of these things is like when things were going well, you know what would happen with them? Their anxiety would actually go up, right? So when like things were smooth, they would start getting anxious. Why? Right? They're like, oh man, it's about to get tough, right? There's something is about to happen, right? So their anxiety would actually go up. But having that anxiety is something that's healthy because it starts that radar. It actually in that gauge, it starts getting you to prepare. It's like okay, and when it does hit, we might not always be emotionally ready for it in the moment, but at least we've done the best that we can to prepare. And subhanAllah, and this is a bit of a sidetrack, but I had given a talk once where who is responsible for uh, your parents when they're elderly? And it's a tough conversation, right? Like when our parents get elderly, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve our parents if they're living, and may He have mercy on them for those that have passed. When they get elderly, or when I get old, I mean I'm already there, but like when I what when we get elderly, who is responsible for me? It was me when I was young, essentially. Because some people be like, oh well, your children need to take care of you. If my son has to pay for my medical expenses, can I expect him to nurse me? Can I expect him to feed me? Because if he leaves his job, well, who's going to take care of the financial burden? Right? Are these fair expectations? And subhanallah, the fuqaha, the scholars of fiqh, there's a ijma', there's a consensus on one way to take care of your parents. If a parent is in poverty, I as a son am obligated to help him financially. But isn't it amazing how none of them say I am obligated to help them physically or be in their health? Why is that? Because not everybody has the ability to nurse. Not everybody's a doctor, right? Not everybody has all these specialties and not everybody has these skill sets. But getting money to help, does that require any special skill set? Like, if my parents need help, for example, and I don't know how to cook, and not just that, when you talk about nursing, when you talk about cooking, when you talk about cleaning, can I outsource these services? Absolutely, right? I can get somebody to come and clean. I can get somebody to come and cook. I can get somebody to come and nurse, meaning that I physically am not responsible. Can I do those if I choose to? Absolutely. And there's a reward in that. And there's a reward in serving. But will I be held accountable on the day of judgment because I hired my parents a maid, or I hired them a nurse, or because I hired them a cook? No. This is important. But unfortunately, for many of us, and for many parents, what is the expectation that they always try to press on their children? Like, you have to take care of me when I get old. So my advice to all of us, while we're still relatively young, that we try not to be like that, and we try to prepare for when we do get to that age, inshallah. We'll stop here. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Inshallah, see you guys next week. Bi-idhnillah ta'ala.